Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Eric LaRocca, the author of several works of horror and dark fiction, including Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, and the just-released You've Lost a Lot of Blood. Welcome to the show!
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and talk about horror. I'm so excited.
Hell yeah, we're really excited. And that is a great segue because we want to know, how did you get introduced to horror?
It was really my mom. Like, my mom was a big horror person growing up. Like, she watched, like, all of the Chiller theater, like, reruns that they used to do, like House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, like the old Universal monster movies. And I was showing an inclination at a very early age to really like things that were just dark for some reason. Like, I just always kind of preferred things that were like monstrous and weird and just like out of the ordinary. And I think she saw that. And the first like major horror film that she showed me that like had a really big influence on me was The Creature from the Black Lagoon. So that was a big one for me. Like, I saw that when I was probably like 8 or 9. And then after watching that, I was just like so obsessed with, you know, seeking out other Universal monster movies and just kind of devouring the genre and really trying to like educate myself. And then I kind of got into horror fiction and, you know, reading as much as I could. And I really like went through the genre, like from the classics to like modern times. And it was such a it was just such an enriching journey. And but it really was like my mom in the beginning that just had that huge impact on me, just developing a love for the genre.
I love hearing that because I think you and I were similar backgrounds, except my dad was the one that introduced me to it. But it was Universal Monsters were the first thing. Probably the first like memory I have of like cinema was the Universal Monsters. I'm curious, which one is it? Creature from Black Lagoon, is that your favorite still, or which one was your favorite as a kid?
I just have a soft spot for Creature. I mean, it's just like, and it's also like kind of an inherently queer story too, because like it's basically like a giant phallus running around like the jungle, like terrorizing like heteronormative behavior. And it's just like, I mean, now I can speak about that because I have like the language to do so. But when I was like 9, I didn't know why I liked it, but you know, being a queer kid, like I was just like immediately drawn to that.
Mm-hmm.
But now I can kind of understand why. But yeah, Creature from the Black Lagoon is definitely like, I think my ultimate favorite like monster, like from the era of like classic Universal monsters.
You also mentioned like horror fiction. What did you said you read some of the classics. Did you then like progress? Did you do like Goosebumps, or did you go straight to like Stephen King and stuff, or what was that progress like?
I never got into Goosebumps really. Like I always wanted to kind of like challenge myself, and I remember like one of my earliest memories is being like, I think in like 3rd or 4th grade, and I brought a book that had the monkey's paw in it, and like that was like the title story. And I forget who wrote it. I think it's like W.E. Jacobs. I think they wrote it. I could be totally wrong, but I remember bringing it to class and just like loving it. And I remember a teacher like saw the book and was like, "You're too young to be reading something like that. Like you probably don't understand what you're reading." And I'm like, I know what I'm reading. Like you know what I mean? Like I just had to like constantly justify myself to adults sometimes. So like, that's why like just going back to my mom, like she was just always so supportive of anything I wanted to do and like anything I wanted to read and watch. So, and my dad too. But like there are just sometimes like adults like don't know how to interact with children, I feel like, and they just like assume, you know, like the children aren't as smart as they are, but like they are, you know what I mean?
I can't remember if it was 6th or 7th grade for me, but I have a memory of being sent to the principal's office because I had a Stephen King book with me.
Oh my God. That's like so heinous. Yeah.
I know, right?
And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, like in I think it was my 7th grade English class, we had like Christopher Pike books, just like, and I don't think anyone knew what they were. I think they were like, "Oh yeah, look, I don't." It's like it was the one about the vampire. It was a vampire one, and it was so funny because I was just like openly reading these books in class. No one else would read them, and I don't think my teacher actually knew what they were. So I just like didn't tell anyone they were horror books. I was like,
well, that's the best thing about fiction. You can like, no one knows what's in it. No one knows that Jaws has a very descriptive explanation of a woman's vagina in it. Like, no one knows this shit.
Right, yeah. You have to, like, experience the book, yeah.
But, so were you easily scared as a kid?
I was, like, afraid of everything, honestly. But I was afraid of, like, being out of control. Like, I was afraid of, like the world around me. You know what I mean? Like, I was never afraid of... Well, that's not entirely true. I was afraid of, like, what I was watching to a certain point, but, like, horror was just always really cathartic for me to, you know, kind of explore my anxieties and just, like, you know, growing up, like, I just felt like I was constantly not in control of anything. Just being a child, you know, it's just, like, not a great thing. Like, ages, like, 6 to 18 are like horrible. I feel like they're just like the worst years. They were for me at least. And it's just, like I just felt like I had like no autonomy. I felt like I had no say over like what I wanted to do and like experience. And I lived in like a very small rural town, and people there were just like not very progressive and just like, you know, it was like a small Connecticut town. So like very affluent, like a lot of like very wealthy people that were just like very kind of judgmental too. And just I mean, I do like where I grew up, where I grew up kind of fostered my love of reading and writing. So I can't say it was a horrible experience because where I lived, like, really brought out the creativity in me, but also, like, in the same breath, like, it was, you know, just adults suck sometimes when they interact with children.
They really do. And I've noticed that a lot, too, like, as I'm an adult with younger cousins and watching how my relatives interact with kids and being like, oh my God, wow, we really don't know how to talk to kids in a respectful manner whatsoever. It's insane.
I totally agree. And that's like that's a good word, like respectful. Like, I feel like a lot of adults just aren't respectful of children, you know?
No.
And they just kind of assume the worst, or they assume that, I don't know. I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, growing up, like, just to get back to what you had asked, like, just about being scared, like, I just felt like very just out of control, and like no one really understood me, and like I just kind of felt like on the outside looking in. And it wasn't until I kind of became much older and really got invested in horror that I was like, oh, this is who I am. Like, this is what I want. Like, this is the person I want to be. And this is why I was so upset growing up, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, transitioning to an adult, what do you think draws you to the genre now?
I think, I talk a lot about this, like, in interviews, but I mean, horror is such a queer genre to begin with. Like, it's just, horror is about the other. And Gabino Iglesias actually posted earlier today, like, on Twitter, he said that he posted this really, like, thought-provoking tweet and basically said that, horror has always been about the other, but I wonder how some folks now react to the fact that the genre of horror is being told by the other. You know what I mean? Like, being told very well by the other. So, like, people who are in the LGBT community, people who are, POC, like, we have, like, all these amazing diverse voices now in horror, and it's just like, I feel like the genre is just having a great moment right now. And I mean, it always has a phenomenal moment. Like, you can go through the history of horror and there's really not many, like, eras that are very quiet. Like, maybe the 90s, like, maybe the 90s weren't, like, the best era for, but then you have, like, Scream. So, like, you can't
Yeah, I
really...
mean, the last half had, like, a bunch of the teen slasher boom.
1999. I know that's not just horror, but there's some, like, that was a good year for
1999 was
movies.
the
Yeah.
best year for movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly.
No, I mean, you really, like, there's really not, like, a bad era for horror. Like, horror has just been consistently delivering the goods, but I feel like now especially we have really cool voices in different, from different backgrounds telling stories. But I mean, what draws me to horror is just the fact that for, like, the longest time it was really white, male, cisgender, and now it's just, like, being flipped on its head completely. But I mean, like I said, like, horror is just such a queer space in general, like, just being about the other and just, like, a veneration of the uncanny and the weird. And that to me just, like, that's like candy to me. Like, I just love that. I love exploring that. It's just, yeah, like, I could just talk about it all day. So I think that's really what draws me to horror. And I think, like, a lot of horror creators now, I think a lot of publishers are recognizing that there's a lot of value in genre fiction, because a lot of mainstream publishers are picking up horror pieces that they're marketing. Maybe they're not marketing as horror outright, like, they're marketing it as, like, dark literary or thriller, but they really are horror. And yeah, I just feel like horror is just such an incredible genre and just a really cool space to explore anxieties and, like, what makes us human too,
Yeah.
I'm curious because so you brought up the tweet, which I think is I just retweeted. It's a fantastic tweet.
So did I.
But so my question is, as a queer author, when do you remember the first time you experienced queerness in a book that you read or a queer author that you read?
Yeah, it was Clive Barker.
Hell yeah.
Definitely Clive Barker. Clive Barker to me is like a god on earth. Like, I'm just not worthy. I am nothing compared to Clive Barker. I just love Clive Barker with all my soul. He really, like, changed like how I view horror and, like, how I perceived how I could, like, contribute to the genre in general. In addition to the movie that we're going to talk about later, which also kind of did the same thing to me, like, it changed, like, how I saw the genre and what you could do with horror. Clive Barker did that to me because, you know, he had in his short story, like In the Hills, the Cities, it had a queer couple in the start of it. And I remember thinking, like, when reading that, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe something that was so mainstream in the 80s that crossed over from being something subversive to something mainstream. I can't believe something like this like existed, you know, because like prior to experiencing Clive Barker's Books of Blood, which is like the Bible to me, that book.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
Prior to that, like there was no queerness that I could see, like, you know, overtly. Everything was coded.
Yeah.
So, you know, Claire Bloom's character in The Haunting from 1963. I mean, that's a queer character, but when I was like 11, I didn't understand how she was queer or, you know, what the implications of her role in that film were. Another like classic example is Suddenly Last Summer by Tennessee Williams. That's hugely queer. But when I was like 11 or 12, I didn't understand anything about what was happening, like who Sebastian Venable was, like why he was getting, spoiler alert, why he was getting cannibalized by the children in this country. Yeah, like just to see Clive Barker being so, and like I watched like a ton of interviews with him when I first found the Books of Blood. I watched like a lot of interviews from the 80s and 90s with him, and he was just so like unapologetically who he was. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I want to be just like that. Like I want to be, not necessarily that I want to be Clive Barker, but I want to one day just be who I am and not give a fuck like what people think, what the genre critics think, and just be a voice for people who were like me, who were like in this small town in like this kind of conservative area, and we're wondering where is the queerness in this genre. You know, there's tons of queer authors now that are writing in horror, which is absolutely amazing, and I love to see it. We need more queer creators like creating mainstream like content, you know. But yeah, no, Clive Barker for me was like the ultimate, and just like my gateway into what can I present in fiction. And he really like showed me that if you have an imagination for it, people will respond to it no matter what. It can be as audacious, it can be as inflammatory, as provocative as you wish. People will come to you and listen to you tell your story. And really it was Clive Barker that inspired all of that, for me at least.
Oh yeah. Wow. But so you're talking a lot about, you know, a lot of writers today, and I'm curious, what's the scariest book you've read recently?
Oh, that's a good question. It's actually an easy answer. So I read an arc for Clash Books, for a book that's coming out in August this year, and it's called Anybody Home, and it's by Michael J. Seidlinger, who's an amazing author. And the book is like, it flips the home invasion genre completely on its head. It's just so unique and so perverse, but it's also just so expertly crafted and just like really well done. And it's like this kind of like ongoing monologue that you're reading, and it feels like something that you shouldn't be reading. You know, it feels like something that's like cursed, that you're like, I'm going to get possessed after I read this book, or something horrible is going to happen to me after I finish reading this book. And it just totally unnerved me. And it's just like, it's probably one of my favorite books of all time. Seriously. Oh, wow. It's just such a well done book. And the cover art is really cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. It's
yeah,
I love
it's
it with
really
the
cool.
finger paint and
It
fingernail
looks like
paint.
kind of like it's like an homage to Funny Games, the cover.
Oh.
The American release with like Naomi Watts on the cover. But yeah, Clash is putting out like really, really cool stuff. And they're actually putting out a book of mine in February next year.
Ooh.
So that's like really exciting. But this book, Anybody Home, I feel like it's going to do really, really well. And I want to see it find an audience like as soon as possible because it's just such a good book.
Well, I just added it to my wish list so that I can keep track of it.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're into like the home invasion subgenre, which I really am, like I love Funny Games and Mother and like, all of anything that's like home invasion related, because that's like what really scares me. That and like body horror are like my two big genres. So yeah, definitely add Anybody Home, I think.
Hell yeah.
So speaking of body horror, let's talk about Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that novel?
Yeah, so it's a novella that came out with Weird Punk Books in June last year, and it went bananas on like Twitter and TikTok and Facebook, like everywhere. And I'm really, really grateful to that because I've been able to meet like a lot of really cool people because of that. But it's like an epistolary meaning that it's told through like, emails, letters, correspondence, IM chats, stuff like that, about two women who meet in a chat room in the early 2000s and develop a very unusual relationship with one another. And it kind of devolves into just bad things. I don't like to say a lot about the book because I feel like the less you know about it, like the better. Which is like any film that I've experienced, like the film we're going to talk about later, like I knew nothing about before I watched it. And those are like the pieces that stay with me. Those books, those films, the stuff that I know absolutely nothing about. And then it just like punches me in the face. Like that's the good shit, like that's really like that's the best form of horror. So I encourage people to like not read reviews before you read it. Don't look at like spoilers, don't Reddit it or anything. Like just read the book because it's coming out again through Titan Books in September this year, in a collection with like two other short stories, novellas. But yeah, so that's basically Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, like in a nutshell.
What I love about it is that it's short enough that I sat down and I couldn't stop. It's like, it's very propulsive. You want to just keep reading it. And so I sat there and I was reading it last night and I was like scrolling on my phone, just reading it going, I just can't stop. It is like past my bedtime, but I'm not going to stop.
Thank you.
And I got a copy before it was out of print. I feel so fancy.
Yeah.
I'm
nice.
obsessed with the cover. The cover art of this. It's beautiful. But I'm curious, like, especially in like an epistolary novel, especially one like this, how did you kind of come to the idea that you wanted to write it in that format? I'm just always so curious about like how it goes from like the straightforward way of writing a narrative to this really awesome way of developing over these relationships through like instant messages.
Yeah, I mean, that was like kind of a very immediate choice for me, like writing the book. Like I was like, I know that I need this to be chat messages, emails, stuff like that. Like I knew that I couldn't tell this story any other way than like their correspondence from one another. Mm-hmm. And, just kind of like going back to Anybody Home for like 1 second, like that book, the way it makes me feel like reading something that I'm not supposed to be reading, that's also the same thing I felt like when I read like House of Leaves and like Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. Like,
oof, yes.
Those are like the books that stay with you, and you feel like dirty after you read them. You feel like a part of the book has like crawled inside you and is like now kind of like living inside you a little bit. That's like what I wanted to kind of like replicate that somehow. I've always been really fascinated by things that are written like unconventionally, things that are kind of told through just like very strange methods. Because like I started out like I started writing fiction kind of later. Like I started really writing plays in the beginning. Like I was a playwright before I was a fiction writer. Actually, like the way Things Have Gotten Worse is structured is actually kind of similar to like a 5-act play, because there are like 5 parts in the novella. And I've actually said for a while that like you could really do a cool production of Things Have Gotten Worse like on stage with just like 2 actors, and you could have like video installations and like make it like a really cool like performance art piece. But yeah, no, I mean like the motivation for doing that unconventional style narrative was just kind of always it was like there was no other option, you know? Like the way I wanted to write it and like how I wanted people to experience the story, I was like, I feel like they're not going to be able to experience it fully unless they're like actually reading what these 2 people are going back and forth about, you know, as opposed to me just like trying to describe it. And yeah, so I mean that's kind of like the genesis of the book, is just like being really influenced by books that you feel like you're reading something that you just shouldn't be reading, you know?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm curious then, you said that you were a playwright first, so when did you start writing, like, in earnest?
I mean, I started writing when I was, like, really young, like, probably, like, 8 or 9.
Okay.
So I started writing plays, like, really young, and I, like, worked with, like, a theater company that was in my local town, and I had some plays that were done by them that I wrote. But then kind of as I got older and, you know, I developed more of a love for horror, it's hard to do horror on stage. And it's not that it's not effective, but it's just you need like a good budget to do something really frightening on stage. Although that's not always true, because I don't know if you 2 are familiar with The Woman in Black, which is like a really great, it's a novel by Susan Hill, but they've also done like a West End production of it. Like as a play. And it's like 2 characters and just like an empty stage. And it's like such a cool, creepy production. So I guess that's not entirely true that you need like a big budget to do something creepy or like cool on stage. But I should maybe say that theater companies usually aren't very keen on doing something that's horrific.
Right.
You know, they kind of want to do something that's a little bit more in line with like something that's more marketable maybe. Not that horror is not marketable, but
a lot of people still think horror isn't marketable. It's wild.
Yeah.
I can't even like entertain.
No, but a lot of people seem to like, they want to shy away from it as if it's like, I don't know, porn or something. Like it has such a weird like relationship to the modern public where it's huge and people watch it, but like no one wants to admit that they're watching it, like in terms of like people producing stuff. It's so bizarre. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's a good comparison, that it's almost like pornography in that people watch it, but they're like almost embarrassed to admit that they watch it or that they create it. I remember like growing up when I was writing horror, I remember like, I mean, I was living in a very small conservative town in Connecticut, but you know, telling people that I was interested in horror, I mean, the looks you would get, like, just, it was not fun. So I totally get that.
I remember when I went to my first screenwriting course, and the professor, I was like, he wanted to know what I was going to write about. And I told him I was doing this serial killer thing. And he's like, you sure you don't want to do a story about a boy and his dog? And I was like, no.
Who?
But it was like, he's like, I just don't think this is going to work out. And I'm like, oh, it's going to work out. And because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to write this little non-horror thing. No.
Yeah.
But that's the way it seems to be a lot when you tell people I want to write horror. It's like, don't you mean like something funny, dramatic, maybe.
Right, yeah. I found that a lot, like, growing up, like, just being a kid that was interested in horror. But then once I turned 18, 19, and then went off to college, I actually had really cool professors that were very supportive of the stuff I was writing. And I was writing, like, if you thought Things Have Gotten Worse was, like, fucked up, like, the shit I was writing in college... I don't know why, like, I wasn't ever expelled. Like, there was one short story I had that was published in an anthology back in, like, 2016, and it's actually one of the few short stories that I'm still, like, relatively proud of. But it was in this anthology called Stiff Things, the splatter porn anthology.
Hell
I love
yeah.
that title.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, obviously there's been discourse around Things Have Gotten Worse with, like, you know, bad representation of queer people and, you know, yada, yada, yada. But I just want to show, like, the people that made those claims, like, I would love for them to read this short story I did back in 2016, because it would make their heads spin, like, how problematic and, like, dark and just grotesque I made like these couple of queer men seem. But yeah, anyway, like, I'm digressing.
Wait, what was the story called? Can you tell?
It was called If My Face Were Transparent, You'd See the Devil.
Oh,
I love your titles.
Fuck yeah, your titles are so fucking good.
Thank you.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's honestly, like, it's, like I said, like, it's one of the few short stories that I can look back on, like, over 5 years ago and be like, you know what, that was actually pretty good, you know?
That's so nice. It's hard to look back on your stuff and think nice things about it. So I know. Fucking hard. So
I know.
But, okay, so speaking of really cool titles, though, you also have You've Lost a Lot of Blood, which came out in March. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Because if they're chomping at the bit for Things Have Gotten Worse, this one's out and they can go read it right now. So what is that book about, or novel?
Yeah,
novella?
so that was kind of just like more of like a gift for my readers, for just, like, sticking behind me and, like, you know, being so thoughtful and kind with Things Have Gotten Worse. And, like, pretty much all of my 2021 releases are out of print now. I mean, just the two of them that came out, but they're going to be both coming out through Titan Books this year and then next year. But I was talking to, like, my manager, and I was just saying, like, I wish I could do something now and just get people, like, give something to people now. And he was like, why don't you just, like, do something independently and just release it, and release something that you're not going to pitch to, like, a bigger publishing house, and just, you know, do it as, like, a one-off thing. And I was like, oh, that's actually a great idea. So I, you know, independently released You've Lost a Lot of Blood, and it's kind of like similar format from Things Have Gotten Worse. Like, it's told through, like, chat logs. There's some poetry in there. There's a novella within a novella in there. I think it's pretty cool. You know, it's got another Kim Jacobson cover art on it, which is, like, really dope. Like,
it's really cool looking
good
too.
Yeah. So, and 50% of the proceeds are going to Trans Lifeline.
Hell yeah.
Which is an awesome organization that's really close to my heart. So, 50% of the proceeds are going to be going to that. So, but because I do have a novella that's coming out in June through Journal Stone called We Can Never Leave This Place. But if you're kind of just interested, maybe you've heard the buzz around Things Have Gotten Worse and you want to just get, like, a taste of my work, you know, I would definitely consider picking up a copy of You've Lost a Lot of Blood.
Hell yeah. Yes. And we'll put links, listeners, in the show notes.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know why I'm pointing down as if I'm on a YouTube video, but click the link in the description.
But okay, so Eric, we've talked about your horror history. But what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
So I brought the iconic Martyrs.
Iconic. Okay, so here's a quick synopsis of Martyrs. A young woman's quest for revenge against the people who kidnapped and tormented her as a child leads her and a friend, who is also a victim of child abuse, on a terrifying journey into a living hell of depravity.
I didn't realize until this IMDb summary that the other character was a victim of child abuse.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Yeah.
I somehow missed that.
Yeah, they both
times
been
I've
through
seen
some
this movie.
shit, which is why.
Yeah.
But I have so many thoughts and feelings about this movie. But Eric, to start us off, tell us why you've picked Martyrs as your Scarred for Life movie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the movie that, like, how I was talking about Books of Blood earlier, like, changed my way of thinking with horror and just how I wanted to be creative. Like, Martyrs also did the same thing for me. It scared, like, the shit out of me when I first saw it and just completely traumatized me. But it also, in, like, a very strange way, it really inspired me. And it was like, at this moment, I was like, you can really show anything on film or, you know, in a book. Like, you can tell kind of any story. You don't have to, like, censor yourself. You don't have to be inhibited in any way. And same thing like what I said with Clive Barker, like, if you have an imagination for it, you, like, readers will come to you and be interested in what the story you have to tell. And it just also, like, it's such a fearless film. It's so, like, audacious and just completely in your face. And that's also just kind of how I like to live my life. Like, what you see is what you get. And, I try to be like, I try to write as fearlessly as possible and write with no inner critic. It's hard. It's obviously hard to do that, and stay true to that. But, Martyrs for me was just like a big turning point and just a movie that was like, just so, I can't think of any other word other than fearless, that just completely destroyed my spirit, made me like a total, like nihilist in a lot of ways. Like, it's just such a bleak film. But then, so I actually rewatched it today before we recorded, and there's also like a little bit of hope at the end that we can maybe talk about more.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely want to discuss the ending. But I'm curious, how old were you when you saw this movie?
I was like 15 or 16. So definitely, like, I shouldn't have been watching it, probably.
I mean, I don't know if there's like a perfect age to watch Martyrs, but that is definitely not the age that is probably great. But so you said that it kind of changed how you viewed horror in a way. Were you surprised because you didn't know anything going into it, correct?
I knew like absolutely nothing. I remember I bought a copy at FYE.
Hell yeah, FYE memories.
Yeah, love FYE. I bought a copy of Martyrs and I bought a copy of Inside, which is another new French Extremity horror movie. I bought both of them like the same day and I watched them like back to back, I think.
Wow.
When you saw them at FYE, did you know anything about them, or did you just like, oh, the covers look fucked up and cool, like let's go for it? Like, how did you, like, I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I knew that they were part of like this movement of like new French filmmaking that was like very like in your face and very aggressive, and just very fucked up. But I just knew what was on the back cover of the of the film, yes, of the like the DVD case. So it was honestly like the best way to experience both of those films. Just like, if you're listening, do not look, if you haven't seen Martyrs or Inside, don't look at any reviews or any spoilers. Like, just watch those films. And, it's just like a once in a, like, I envy people who watch Martyrs for the first time without knowing anything. Like, I envy that experience.
But it is like it's like, because I had a similar, like, it was like a transcendent experience for me. Like, to play off of like how the movie is kind of about like the nihilism of transcendence. But like, I was introduced to New French Extremity in college because I watched High Tension and Inside in a class.
Yes.
Which was really cool. And I'd never heard of Inside. I watched Inside in a class. I was fucking ruined. Like, that movie ruined my ass. And then I'd heard of Martyrs, but I was too nervous. It was one of those movies you saw on all the lists that were like fucked up movies that like you shouldn't watch, and like you're gonna be fucked up if you watch this. And after watching Inside, I was like, psh,
I can handle it.
I can do fucking anything.
Yeah.
I was wrong about that, but I absolutely loved Martyrs. I think everything you said about it is true, but I think there's something also very queer about this movie. I think there's a queer reading to be had about this movie. I think it is a very interesting look at trauma and how people become codependent when they are dealing with trauma. But I also just think it's so fucking bleak and so dark, and the conceit behind all of it with a cult trying to understand the afterlife and create a martyr is absolutely insane. Like, I never would have thought of that idea. Like, that is such a wild concept, but it seems so obvious when you think about it, but you're like, I would never have thought about like this whole society about creating a martyr out of a young woman, and the whole conceit is they torture young women. And it's just, I didn't know anything about it when I watched it, and I was just like, this is a lot. Like, there are a lot of things to digest about this movie, and it also is two different movies because it changes tone very quickly halfway through.
It does, yeah.
But Terry, I want to hear, before we start like digging into the movie, I do want to hear your reaction, because I know you have a very different relationship to this movie than I think Eric and I have.
I do. So I can't honestly remember when I first saw this movie. It would have been probably at least 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7. I can't remember, but it was well after it had been released. It'd been that movie that everyone talks about, the sort of like, this is the most fucked up movie ever, that type of thing. And so I was like, I don't know. I just stayed away from it. And one day I was like, okay, well, I watched Inside. Really liked Inside. I was like, I don't really know much about French New Extremity. So I was like, I had seen High Tension in theaters. So I was like, well, if it's kind of like this, I'll watch it. And I didn't know anything going into it either. And the thing that like really, it grabs you immediately, because the movie starts with like a young little girl screaming, face cut, beaten, bloodied, her hair's been shaved, running out of like a slaughterhouse almost. And it's just like, what is going on here? And you have this like cold open, and then it immediately cuts to a scene of a family sitting down for breakfast. And then all of a sudden they're being shotgunned down. And I'm like, what am I even watching? I was like almost laughing at the like absurdity of what I was seeing on screen. So I was like, what is even happening right now? The tone in this is just constantly shifting. And I was really digging it. And I was like digging the fact that there was, almost like a home invasion thing. And then it felt almost like a Japanese horror thing with like the kind of creepy demonic lady that is crawling around over the place. Like it was giving me all this vibes. And then boy, I lost interest completely when it turned into the woman getting punched for 30 minutes. And I remember just like sitting back in a chair and like my face going from being like elated at the wildness I was watching to like, oh. And then I ended up really not liking it. That was my first reaction to the movie. Because I feel like the moment the torture
it's okay
starts,
to be wrong sometimes. No, I'm just kidding.
I just feel that when the torture starts, it like all of a sudden it takes the air out. Like it just all of a sudden is like the woman loses agency.
I love it.
I know, I get that.
That part.
It's like all of a sudden, like I'm watching this badass woman, like trying to take care of her friend, trying to do all this stuff. And then all of a sudden she's in a chair and she's just getting punched repeatedly for like 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't like this. And yeah, that was my first reaction to it. And I'll be honest, I'm actually really excited that we're talking about this movie, because I desperately like to try to understand this movie better, because I sometimes wonder, if I just don't get it. Because like I posted last night that I was watching this movie and I got maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 50 replies, and everything was like, I was terrified to watch, but ended up loving it. I enjoyed it. It's a masterpiece. I love this movie. One person responding that they love the part where Xavier Dolan gets blasted by a shotgun, which I don't know what the intent behind him saying that is, because he's a gay person getting blasted. And I hope that's not where this is going. But it's just like all these people like responding about how much of a masterpiece it is, the best movie of the last 20 years. And I'm just like, what am I missing? So I'm as much as I was dreading rewatching this, I'm really excited that we are talking about this with two people that absolutely love it, so I can maybe find a better appreciation for it, because that's what I strive to do. Yeah, that's my piece.
That's fair. I appreciate that.
That is fair, because I feel like, so like the beginning is very fast paced, and there's a lot happening. There's a lot of blood. And then it does slow down. It slows down a little bit. But I think what I like about that though is I think it's subverting those expectations of like a final girl kind of thing is how I viewed it recently. Is like you come into this movie expecting, okay, Lucy is the girl who we see at the beginning. Lucy's the girl at the beginning who we see who's incredibly traumatized, and her friend Anna. Yeah. Anna. I'm just thinking, Her friend Anna is her best friend and essentially like her caretaker. And Anna is the one who's kind of making sure Lucy doesn't get herself in trouble. Lucy gets herself in trouble. So now Anna is the one that has to clean up the mess, because of Lucy's actions. And, Lucy's getting revenge against the people who imprisoned her as a kid. And, partially you're like, yeah, I get it. But at the same time, you see Anna having to kind of pick up the pieces, like, you didn't plan this the way you were supposed to, like, Jesus Christ. And in the meantime, they also find another woman chained in the basement. And there's a lot of, pretty crazy things happening all at once. Also, Lucy sees a manifestation of her trauma that is kind of like a feral woman. And that's also going on top of everything else. And there's just a lot of things happening, a lot of things to parse through, a lot of blood, a lot of guts. And then you switch to this more kind of contemplative, weird existential half of the movie where you learn it's no longer just revenge. It's learning what's going on with this cult. And I think to me that the reasoning that kind of they get into with this the back half is what really, I think, kept me going in terms of it being something more horrifying than you could ever imagine. You know what I mean? Like, I think that when the incredible madam, like the turban and her cigarettes and her tiny glasses.
I love her.
I love her. Iconic. Yeah. Explaining what they're doing. It's just like, it's so fucking scary and so fucked up. And this is so fucked, but like, this is real because rich old people are fucking crazy and are always looking for like the secret to death and immortal life. And this is essentially a movie about people desperate to know what happens after you die. And that desperation leads them to the cruelest, most horrific acts you could think of, especially to children, because the whole thing is young women and how young women are the demographic. And it's just so fucked up that I'm obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. And that might have something to do with my weird brain and how I love this kind of like deeply nihilistic, horrific shit. But I think it's fascinating how they focus on that and flip the script on having Anna go from this like incredibly strong character who knows what she's doing to being stuck. And I think that's what New French Extremity does so well for me, is in terms of like, it gives you these characters that are absolutely incredible and then not even they can escape their circumstances. And that to me is like so nihilistic in the face of what we expect from like slashers. We're like, oh, well, she'll get out of it okay in the end. But this one, it's like, no, and you're going to watch her fall apart. Yeah. And like, there's something to be said, or people could say there's misogyny to it. Yeah, I suppose. I don't read it that way.
Is that what people say?
I've seen it. I've seen people say it before. I've heard that argument, like about like it being misogynistic because of that. I don't agree with that personally. but I've seen that rating before. But also, like, to put it bluntly, you watch slasher movies where women get brutalized all the fucking time. And for me, I feel like there's such a fucked up specific purpose that it transcends that kind of just watching a woman get brutalized. And from how I am viewing the film.
Well, okay, so I do want to say, because like watching it this time, I felt a little bit more of the misogyny, and here's why. And it's really because since I had originally watched this movie, I watched his other film, Incident in a Ghostland.
Oh, I love that movie.
Oh, I find that so misogynistic.
Oh, I love that movie.
It's one of the few movies that I actually... No, you're not canceled. But it's no one's canceled here. It's one of the movies that I absolutely hated. Like, it's a review that I literally put the title, I hated this movie.
Wow.
And it's because, again, for like half the movie, it's about these two young women, again, who are just being brutalized, and they have no agency in the film. And I think that's what bothers me is when I watch these films, and it's something that I have a mental block that I can't get past, because these characters, unlike slashers who have agency through most of the movies, especially in the good ones, they might be going through trauma, but they're actually being able to like break free of it. Here we have two movies where it's literally the last half of the movie, or the last 30 minutes, or however long it is them just literally being punched in the face constantly. And I can't get past that. Every time I watch these movies, it just like eats me up inside. And I can't, it just makes me go from being interested in the movie to just sitting back with my arms crossed, like, I don't like this.
But it's an old woman doing it, isn't it? It's not misogyny if a woman does it.
But it's a man that's punching her.
I'm just being a facetious asshole.
But it's a man that's punching her. That's the other thing. It's like she has a woman that comes down and feeds her in Martyrs, and it has a man that is just sitting there literally beating her up, and then it's a man who is skinning her alive. So it's like these men that are doing it. And so maybe if it was a woman doing it, maybe that would have been a little, I don't know, different. But it's the fact that we have a woman caregiver who is feeding her. Yes, she's a little harsh in her feeding her, but she's feeding her. And we have a man that is constantly brutalizing her. It just... It makes me feel icky. And the fact that he does it again in Incident of a Ghostland just makes me even more icky. That's just what I can't get past, I guess.
I get it. That part of the film, when we kind of switch and it becomes Anna's story as opposed to Lucy's, because prior to like the 45-minute mark, it's pretty much like all Lucy's story. And you kind of think that like, oh, it's like the trajectory of this film, we're going to be following Lucy, and then she ends up killing herself, and it switches to Anna.
Let me tell you, when I screamed when that happened when I first saw this movie, I was like, what?
Yeah.
What is I don't know what's going to happen anymore. Like, I kind of, like,
that's why I love this movie, because like you don't feel safe watching it.
You do not.
That's
no.
true.
Because as soon as she dies, you're like, uh-oh, it's all out the door. Like,
there's another 45 minutes left. Yeah. And it's like, what the fuck?
It's
no, I get it.
It's like the modern equivalent of like Psycho almost, where Janet Leigh's character is killed in the shower like at the 45-minute mark, and you don't know where the movie's gonna go. And that, to me, like, that's a brilliant storyteller. That one that you're reading something or you're watching a film and you think to yourself, I don't feel safe watching this. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who's going to live. I don't know, what the outcome's going to be. That, to me, like, is just brilliance. And I personally, I really, really respect the director, the writer, Pascal Laugier, or Logier, however you pronounce it. I think, when I first saw Incident in a Ghostland, I wasn't as enamored with it as I was with Martyrs, because it did feel like a little bit repetitive in like the same sort of themes and kind of things that he was bringing to the table. It didn't seem like there was really anything substantially new that he was kind of bringing to us. But I've rewatched it a couple of times since, and it actually... I've kind of found new things to appreciate while rewatching it. But with Martyrs specifically, that section of the film where Anna's getting just totally brutalized and then eventually she's flayed alive, That's my least favorite part of the film. And I remember watching it today, I remember thinking to myself, why is this part, like, why do I have such a problem with this part? Like, why do I not like this as much as the rest of the film? Because to me, like, Martyrs is a masterpiece. Like, Martyrs is, like, the perfect horror film to me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, why do I have such a problem with this second act of the film? And it boiled down to the fact that it just made me uncomfortable. It just made me very, very uncomfortable to watch the abuse of this character, you know, the systematic abuse of this one character. And that, to me, any film that can make me uncomfortable after all the shit I've seen, and, you know, like, that to me that's a huge win for any director, storyteller, writer, whatever. You know, the fact that I've seen this film like many, many times and I'm still uncomfortable. And I don't think I'm uncomfortable because it's a misogynistic rendering of a story. Like, I'm just uncomfortable because the story, like, where the director takes us, he takes us to, like, beyond the limits of what you think is going to happen. He takes us beyond that. And that, to me, like, that's what I live for. I live for shit like that. Like, I love that in fiction and in film. I love feeling totally unsafe and like something's gonna just totally upend my sense of stability.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really boils down to the fact that part of the film just makes me totally uncomfortable.
Well, it's nauseating because it's like the whole point is they're trying to push her beyond the like any human limit of like torture. And I think that in and of itself is fucking hard for anybody to watch. I would hope. I mean, if it's not hard for you to watch, let me know.
Right.
But like
Please don't let me know. Just get away from me.
Don't
block
talk
us.
To me. Like, if it's,
block us and run away.
Cute. Because I think another reason why it's effective for me is because it is trying. It is, the purpose is pushing beyond the limit of both her body, but I also think of the viewer. I think he wants to test you while you're watching this, and wants to put you through that fucking like put you through that ringer and make you uncomfortable. And I can't imagine he didn't kind of see like the optics of a woman getting hit by a guy, and maybe that factored into that kind of that discomfort, which is something again that I enjoy is a strong word, but like appreciate greatly in the movie. I did not like Incident in a Ghostland as like very much, but this movie I feel like is just so brutal for such a specific reason, and I feel like this is like the new French Extremity movie. Like when I think of new French Extremity, like this is the movie, because all of them are fucking terrible, but I feel like this one is the most just like brutal, besides Inside.
I think for me, that movie, like the movie, I mean, this definitely is up there for new French Extremity when I think of the genre, but the one that like really is very, very difficult for me to watch is Irreversible. I don't know if I have not even watched that one. Yeah,
but fair. I forgot that's new French Extremity. I haven't even tried to watch that one yet.
That one is yeah, I've only seen it like once, I think, once or twice. It's really hard to watch.
Yeah, and see, I'm not very well versed in New French Extremity. I've seen, I think, 3 movies: Martyrs, Inside, and High Tension.
Okay, yeah.
The other 2 I could watch like constantly, even as problematic as High Tension is, and it's deeply problematic. I could watch both of those hands down, because it's not necessarily the nihilism. I love the nihilism of these movies. It's just. Yeah, again, it comes down to the agency aspect. I don't know.
Do they say High Tension is problematic?
Yeah, because the whole like the monstrous lesbian.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yawn.
I also love High Tension and know that like it's the plot holes around it. Like if you think too hard about High Tension, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's okay. Who cares? It's
who
cares?
It's
just enjoy it. Yeah.
My only problem with High Tension is that I'm pretty sure that the idea behind it was stolen from Dean Koontz, because he wrote a book that is very similar up until
I'll have to read it. I haven't read a lot of Dean Koontz.
I think it's called. I can't remember what it's called. It might even be called Tension. But it was
no.
No, maybe it's not. I don't remember. I honestly can't remember what it's called, but it is literally about a woman who is, I think, visiting her friend. Someone in a truck comes, kills the family, kidnaps them. She is stuck in the back with like hiding from him.
Wow.
Like it is literally this movie. And then of course there's no mental illness, reveal of her doing it to her friend.
I mean, it's kind of like a basic setup, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, it is, but I mean, literally down to like hiding in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
The tension of like not being caught, and then but it's very like, I read that book and then I saw the movie. I was like, wait a second, I've seen this.
I'll have to read it. I really haven't like explored Dean Koontz that much, but
he's not very good.
Really?
But he has like one or two books that I really enjoy, but like he just, I don't know. When you think of like the typical 80s, 90s horror author that is just churning out the books like this, like 4 or 5 a year. Yeah. They get to be very formulaic, his books, but there's one or two that really stand out, but he's not my bag.
Joke's on us. He's getting that check, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like, get that money, honey. But
he's doing it.
But
it's an entire shelf of books in any library you go to.
I mean, he's a
best-selling
author.
It's
Who
incredible.
am I?
Yeah, it's incredible. I did want to talk briefly though about like the queerness of this movie that I clued in on later when I was finally realizing that I myself am queer and watching this movie and seeing this very interesting codependent, it's a toxic relationship, but see a codependent relationship between Lucy and Anna, because Lucy and Anna become best friends in an orphanage where they're both just full of trauma. And they, you trauma bond. I figured most of us have had some kind of person we've trauma bonded with, someone who you're like, oh my God, you get me.
Totally.
Thank God. You finally find a person who understands like the fucked up shit you've been through and you become attached to them for better or for worse. And they're obviously that to the extreme in terms of how, Lucy decides to murder a whole family. And you have to help clean that up. But there's also this nurturing relationship.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, as you do. Terry, I'd do it for you, just so you know. I would, in fact, clean up a whole house.
If you're listening,
bodies.
FBI, I would not. But now that you're gone, I totally would too.
But there's this love, at least from Anna to Lucy. And I go back and forth if it's reciprocated and if Lucy is so kind of focus on her vision of revenge and Anna is in love with her and is following her because she's in love and it's kind of an unrequited situation. I flip-flop between the two because I think there are two readings you can have with that. Mm-hmm. But I currently am in the camp of that Lucy is very singular visioned and Anna is kind of like following her because she's in love with her, not just because they're friends, but because there is something deeper there for her that Lucy can't see through her own trauma and her desire for revenge, and Anna trying so hard to be there for her so when she maybe one day snaps out of it, she can be like, I'm here for you, and they can live happily ever after.
Yeah.
I'm curious if either of you saw something like that while watching. Okay.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, that, the movie, like, it's kind of very obvious that there's something between them, like, there's some sort of thing, there's something that's like pulling them together, but also like Lucy is so just dogged in her pursuit of like revenge and her own trauma that she kind of can't really reciprocate. She can't give Anna the love that Anna really wants from her.
Yeah.
But I totally agree that there's like, Martyrs is a very queer film and that like their relationship, there's something just inherently queer about it to begin with. But I mean, you could read it like a bunch of different ways, but I totally agree that with like your assessment of it, where it's like, Lucy can't really give Anna what Anna really wants most of all,
Yeah.
It's funny because one of the things that surprised me on this rewatch, because again, it's probably been 5 or 6 years since I saw it, and this is only the second time that I've seen it. But I remember I had a memory when I first watched it that they were queer and in love.
Oh, interesting.
And so rewatching it this time and seeing like the moment when Anna leans in and kisses her and she pushes her away and she's like, "No, what are you doing?" Mm-hmm. I was like, it made what happens next like even more tragic for me, because like I feel like on this rewatch, I'm leaning in more of the unrequited love from Lucy. Like they were just best friends, and Lucy saw her as that sort of codependent kind of trauma buddy, whereas Anna was like, yes, trauma, but also I kind of want to smush my parts on you. And
That's one way to put it.
and
Smush my parts on you.
Yeah, so that made it a little bit more tragic for me, and I actually audibly gasped at that point when she pushed her away, because in my mind, when I had seen it before, that is not how that scene had played out, and I had a similar realization when we want to start talking about the ending. I had a similar realization about that ending point. I don't know if there's anything
we can start talking about the ending. I
with.
have something related to the ending in that, so we can. I'm totally down to transition to that.
Okay, I am curious I'm curious what you think Anna told Mademoiselle at the end.
Suck my ass, you old bitch. I'm just kidding. Sorry. That was so funny. Sorry.
Can you imagine?
After all that.
In her ecstatic sense, she said, suck my ass.
You old bitch. That's an important
you
thing
old
to
bitch.
add.
That's it. That is my bad. That is the most important part of it.
That'd honestly be an incredible way for her to go out. Just be like, anyways.
I am curious because, again, this is the other area where I saw it one time and I had a complete, utter thought of how it ended. And then watching it this time, I had a completely different thought. So I'm curious what you both think of the ending and in terms of like what Anna told her and why she killed herself and the whole like meaning behind it.
I went back and forth. Like anytime I watch this movie, I interpret the ending a different way. Mm-hmm. Like there are times that I'll watch this movie and I will think that, whatever Anna told Mademoiselle was that there's nothing out there. Like there's nothing beyond death. All of this is pointless. Everything you've been doing is pointless. And I've had that reading a couple times, but for some peculiar reason today when I was watching it, I had like a really strong feeling of hope. Like, and I don't know why, like I can't pinpoint it, but I was watching it and maybe it's just like, maybe it's because I've seen it so many times now that I'm just like kind of hoping that it's hope I'm feeling at the end. But like I was just very convinced today when I was watching it that whatever Anna had told Mademoiselle was that there's something really beautiful and wondrous waiting in the world beyond what we know on this planet. And that's why Mademoiselle killed herself, because she like desperately wanted to go be there and experience that herself. And that's the reading I took from it today. But like I said, any other time I'd watched it, I'd had this really intense feeling of just total bleakness and like despair, and like Mademoiselle killed herself because there was no point to anything that they had done, but for today I just felt this really like strong sense of hope and like just like there's something wondrous waiting for all of us,
That's interesting. I never thought of it as hopeful, because when I initially watch this, it was very much like, there's nothing, like, we're all fucked, goodbye. The most recent time when I rewatched this, I was thinking, there's something fucked up after death. Like, it's not nothing. There's something horrific. And while Mademoiselle killing herself would be like, why would she want to confront it? Maybe it's because she doesn't want to delay facing that hell and have that knowledge of that hell awaiting her. Mm-hmm. That was a recent interpretation of, like, there's something bad waiting for us after death, and, like, you don't want anything to do with it.
I love that reading. That's a great reading.
That would be so cool.
That would be really cool.
Y'all were looking for something good, and you were fucking with something terrible. Yeah. Like, that, if there was ever to be a sequel, we don't need one, but like that would be so cool if there was like delving into some weird like Hellraiser Event Horizon bullshit going on that they like stumbled into by accident. Oh, that would be so fucking cool. But
that would be so cool.
But before I ask you really quick, I just wanted to say that the last part, like with her getting flayed, it also reminds me a lot of like this might be dramatic, but like, what happens when you put other people in front of you and you take on their trauma as your own? Because she's taking on Lucy's trauma. Like this, it's like quite literally, she takes on like this trauma from Lucy, who lived through this, and Anna hadn't experienced it, and now Anna is taking it on. Not willingly, but she was at first willingly taking on parts of Lucy's trauma. And as a person who is very willing to take on people's trauma, I saw that a little bit, especially in more recent viewings, as a very dramatic look at what it means to kind of put others in front of yourself and take on their issues, their things they're dealing with, and making them your own problems, and what maybe the consequences that has for your own body and soul. And that's a very personal reading, like, but I feel that a lot watching this now, as like, you know, when a person doesn't necessarily reciprocate in those relationships, what it means to like share and support, and then like kind of that really dramatic, extreme kind of manifestation of what that looks like. But wanted to put that in and talk about that before jumping into what you think, Terry, at the end. Yeah. Because
that's a great, I think that is a fantastic way of looking at it. I hadn't even thought about that, but it seems perfect, because like I was thinking as I was watching it this time about how like, oh, she is literally kind of regressed back to Lucy's childhood, and now she's facing what Lucy faced as a child, as an adult. And so like that was in my mind, but I hadn't even like connected all the little dots. So I like that. Okay, my first watch of this movie and my memory of seeing this movie was that the ending was finite. It was, bitch told her there is nothing good out after death, and she's like, well, I'm over. Like, this was all pointless. And that was my thought, that was like, that was concretely how this ended. And as I was watching it this time, I started having a different perspective on the ending. And I think it's ambiguous. I mean, obviously it's ambiguous. We're all having different, takes on it. But what I started focusing on in particular was the movie starts with, Lucy as a child, and Lucy is played by a woman who is French and Chinese. And we have that whole big beginning, and then we have the whole like stereotypical white family, woman with blonde hair, this perfect like upper class white family. And so there's like a class and a race dynamic at play here that I think I missed on my first watch. And that continues. Once we get past this very rich family, then we find out that there's a whole other level of rich society that is like the 1% of the 1% that are like even more heinous than what they're doing, because they're like small peons compared to this like secret society of very rich old white people. And they're manufacturing all this torture. And then at the very top of that 1% of the 1% of the 1%, you have Mademoiselle, who at the very end finds out whether it's good, bad, indifferent, nothing, finds out what happens in the afterlife. And then instead of sharing it with the other 1% of the 1%, is like, I'm hoarding this knowledge. I'm out. Peace.
Oh, shit.
And so it's like, again, the fact that that shit is just going to roll downhill, where she is so rich, so powerful, and she has that knowledge, and she's going to die with that knowledge. And she's going to leave the one person that is asking her with like doubt. She's like, keep doubting. It's almost like a big fuck you. Like, I know the truth and no one else does. Mm-hmm. And isn't that like the entitlement of like the rich upper class? Like, isn't that what kind of boils down to? So I had a better appreciation for that aspect of it this time because of putting those little pieces together.
Okay, but also, like, what a fucking incredible movie that we have. We all three have different readings that are all just as fucking viable and cool.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Once, like, it just, they give you that ending and they give you just enough to kind of make your own conclusion. And every conclusion's fucked up. Like, no matter how you interpret it, there's nothing happy about it. And it's so good. It's such a good movie.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece, I think. It's his best film. Definitely.
I agree with you there.
Well, do we want to wrap this up and give this our rating out of 5, everybody?
We do, but I want to point out one part that like bothered the shit out of me this time. And it is after Lucy is dead, Anna finds the poor woman who is,
chained up
bound
in the
and
basement.
blinded and chained up and horrible, right? And she leads her upstairs, and I wanted to be like, bitch, why are you pulling those staples out of her head? Go run. Go call the cops. Go do something. Instead, she's like making it worse by pulling out the staples out of her head.
That
I'm
was
like,
so bad.
You're not a medical person. I know that you're doing like triage and stuff,
Right.
but leave that to like the fucking professionals. Get out of there.
That's also, but like, think about calling the cops in that situation, and you're like,
Yeah, what would you do?
all right, so we have a situation.
It's like the freeze frame, right? You're probably wondering how I got here.
It's like, how do I frame this in the best possible way without getting arrested? I don't think there's a way, but uh-oh. I have a tornado. I have a tornado warning. Get down to the floor.
Uh-oh.
Perfect timing.
I'm on the 15th floor of an apartment building. It's probably fine. East Coast things. This happens all the time in the state of Maryland. Anyway, sorry. I was like, uh-oh, do I have to go? I'll be fine. Yeah. Sorry. But like I say, imagine calling the cops and be like, look, I got a couple problems here, but the biggest one is that there's a woman who's been chained in someone's basement. I didn't kill these people.
Well, all you have to do is say, listen, I got a phone call from my friend. I came here. I don't know what is going on. And I found this blind person stumbling about. Good luck.
Imagine being a cop walking into that situation. You're like, nah.
Oh, God.
No.
I would have just been like, nope, here's my badge. I'm out.
But also, like, think about it. If the cops were called, I guarantee you this is the kind of society that has the cops wrapped around their fingers, and the cops know that this is happening,
no,
too.
they do.
Probably. Yeah.
But anyway, Terry, let's wrap this up and give this rating out of 5. How many flayed bodies out of 5 do you give this, Terry?
Can I pass? Okay. So here's the thing.
Your friendship lies in the balance. I'm just kidding.
I know.
You're gonna break my heart, Terry.
I know. I'm sorry. Okay. But here's the thing. Here's what I like. I'm in a much better place than when I started this episode. Like I was like fucking nervous about being like. I was like, I'm gonna give this movie like a 1 or 2 stars, and it's gonna be like what? But okay. So here's the thing. I do not like this movie. I don't. I like about 3/4 of it, and that last fourth just is a deal breaker for me. That is what I'm going into, and I just can't get past that. However, I do have a better appreciation for this movie. In particular, I think the narrative structure is very interesting. Like you said, Eric, I think the way that it is constantly jarring you from scene to scene, where it starts as one thing and it turns into something completely different, and then it turns again, and then it changes again, and then it changes again, and it's like it's constantly changing. And so it's very hard to like pin this movie down. And I think that's fascinating and fantastic. And I love that. It does remind me of picking up like an old VHS tape and you don't know what's on and you're watching it. And it's just like, there's that sense of danger. And I get that watching this. I got that watching it last night as I'm streaming it on fucking Shudder. It's like, even though I'm watching this on something that is so sanitized and corporate and fed to me, it still feels very dangerous. And I think that's fantastic. I love that we're able to discuss all of these little theories on it and get to different reactions about what it actually means. I think that is great. I think technically this movie is pretty damn close to a masterpiece in terms of like the filmmaking on display, in terms of like, I mean, I would say the acting, but it's just a lot of physical acting, and it's just, but yeah, there's a lot here that I think is really good. I just cannot get past the last fourth of this movie, and that is something I'm not going to be able to ever get past. It just is not going to happen. So from a technical standpoint, I do think this is probably, I'm cutting that body in half and giving it probably 4.5 flayed bodies, which is even probably worse than, a full flayed body. But for me personally, I don't like this movie. So it's complicated. What about you, Mary Beth?
Full 5 bodies out of 5 for me. It's been a full 5 since I first saw it when I was, I think, in my 20. I think I was 20. And it continues to be. I think this movie is a masterpiece. I think everything about it is so purposeful. I think this movie is one of the reasons why I love New French Extremity so much, and why I have such an appreciation for that. This is why I love nihilistic filmmaking. I love extreme horror. This movie is queer. It's gross. It's fucked up. It's complicated. And I think it's it's like straightforward, but not straightforward enough that you can't have these kind of really awesome discussions about interpreting the ending and some of the actions these characters take. So it's this like beautiful balance between like straightforward and vague storytelling that leaves you to have kind of a very personal experience with it. I think this is a very personal film to watch. Like for me, it's a very personal film, I think, just because of how like emotionally invested I am in this movie. And I think it's a personal film because of how intense it is for a lot of people. Like seeing it, I feel like it's hard to watch this with other people. I've never watched it with another person, and I feel like this is a movie best watched alone. Which sounds weird for the subject matter, but honestly, like there's a lot of thinking and processing you're doing through it, and it's hard to do with another person.
Yeah, funny story is that my roommate, she watches these movies whenever I watch, and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna watch this movie. It's really fucked up. There's some really bad violence against women." She's like, "I'm gonna pass." And I'm like, "Thank God," because I don't think I want to watch this with another person. So
you're like, I can't do this. But yeah. Well, Eric, you have the final say. How many flayed bodies out of 5 do you give Martyrs? I think I know your answer, but
I'm gonna go with 10. 10.
10. Hell yeah.
No,
10,
I mean,
10,
you
10's
said
across
it
the board.
perfectly. I mean, I just want to echo everything you said. You just said it so eloquently, and you really like captured the spirit of this movie. I mean, it is just such a masterpiece. And for me, like, it's just very, very personal. I saw it, during a very just important kind of era in my life. And it really informed a lot of the creative decisions that I now make with my own writing. And, it's really because of Martyrs that, I want to write more extreme, disturbing kind of fiction. So yeah, no, Martyrs for me is it's an absolute masterpiece. And, I'm sorry you don't feel that way, Terry. That's totally fine. But I love any fiction or film that has that polarizing effect with people, where you can talk to one person and they'd be like, "Oh, it's a masterpiece. I loved it. Such a great, work." And then you talk to somebody else and you're like, "Oh, that was horrible. Like, I don't know why that's popular, blah, 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 blah." Like, I love things that are like that. And I feel like that's what makes really interesting art. The worst thing that can happen when you release your art into the world is if nobody's talking about it. Yeah. But if you release something that is true to your vision and is audacious and is bold and new and fresh, you'll absolutely get responses from people. And they may not all be the responses that you're looking for. You might get some hate, you might get some, negative feedback, but, at least people are talking and reacting to what you put out into the world.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And hey, if it's the reason why you're writing all this dark fiction, then I'm giving Martyrs 10 out of 10 because yay. So
thank you.
At the end of the day, if that's what we get out of it, then I am completely happy that it exists.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.
But thank you again so much, even though like I was dreading revisiting this film and then talking about it because I knew you both really loved it. Thank you again for joining us to talk about Martyrs. Where can our listeners find you? And do you have anything coming up that you're able to share?
Yeah, so listeners can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My @ is Hysteric Teeth. And my website is ericlarocca.com. And coming up, I have a novella that's coming out in June with Journal Stone called We Can Never Leave This Place. Pre-orders are going to be going out very, very soon. So that's really exciting. And then in September, I have Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes. And that's coming out through Titan Books in the UK. It's coming out, internationally. So it'll be available on September 6th. And readers can pre-order that right now, actually.
Awesome.
Hell yeah. And like we said at the top, we'll have links in the description of the podcast so you guys can get all that good stuff. But listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Martyrs? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thanks everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.